Hi folks. This week we're getting into our unit of the course that deals with Gothic literature, American Gothic literature, and there's no better place to start that tradition in the literary canon than with the incomparable Edgar Allan Poe. Edgar Allan Poe is a iconic American author. He's very well known for his influence on the Gothic genre and his influence on these styles of, sort of spooky, creepy stories. However, he is so much more than that when it comes to the tradition of literature. He believed heavily in the craft. He, in many respects, defined what the short story is, even today. And the way that he composes his stories and puts them together gives us a lot to talk about in terms of their literary composition, in terms of how we can put all of these elements together to make meaning. Poe's stories are sometimes described as little puzzles, meaning there are going to be clues and pieces that point us in various directions, but as is the craft of story, we are often not going to be given the answer to how to put those puzzle pieces together. Now, Cask of Amontillado is one of his most famous stories. Some critics have called it a perfect short story because the way that all of these puzzle pieces line up, every sentence of the story can be interpreted to mean something that points us in various different directions. And critics and scholars have debated the way that we put those puzzle pieces together for over 100 years at this point. So, after you read the story, we are going to get into some of that critical debate and talk about how complex and strategic the craft of this story is. But before you read it, I want to prime you for some things that you'll want to be thinking about as you're reading and things you'll want to be aware of as a reader. Now, the crux of this story is the fact that Montresor is the one telling it, and he is perhaps the most classic example of an unreliable narrator, and really a quite complicated unreliable narrator, because he tells the story in a very coherent, rational, strategic, calculated sort of way. However, his actions don't really seem to align with the rationality of his telling. So what parts of this story is it that we're supposed to question? What are the puzzle pieces that point us to the puzzle solve, so to speak? And really, just to illustrate how careful this story is in that craft, the biggest questions in the scholarly conversation, the critical conversation, are really established within the first two sentences of the story, which are, "The 1,000 injuries of Fortunato I had borne as best I could, but when he ventured upon insult, I vowed revenge. You, who so well know the nature of my soul, will not suppose, however, that gave utterance of a threat." So from the very beginning of the story, he tells us, Fortunato and me have had problems for a while, but then he did this insult, this vague insult that we don't know what it is, but he did this insult thing. And it was so bad that I had to vow against revenge. But you, person who I'm telling the story to, you know me. You know who I am. You know that I wouldn't have threatened him. And so the question, of course, is what sort of insult, what sort of conflict between these two characters could have caused Montresor to carry out this revenge? He goes on about this revenge for the first paragraph, saying, "I must not only punish, but punish with impunity," meaning I have to let him have it and let him have it without restraint. And what is it that could have caused that? That's something that we'll talk about in your analysis video after the story. The other question, of course, is who is the you? Who is he telling the story to? Who is this person who so well knows the nature of his soul? And what is the nature of his soul? What nature of his soul is he referring to? Now, at the end of the story, you'll learn Montresor is telling this 50 years after it happened. So this revenge plan has happened 50 years ago. Why is he telling it now? who is he telling it to? Because knowing who he's telling it to, or what his motivation is for telling it at all 50 years after the fact, that's going to give us an idea of what motivations he might have in his manipulation of the story. Now, finally, one thing that a lot of people question in a lot of Poe's work, but particularly in the Cask of Amontillado, is this question of the nature of evil. Does man become evil, or is he born that way? What is the nature of evil in mankind? And in the case of Montresor, a lot of times that question is sort of reduced to, is Montresor just evil? Is he just an immoral guy? Or is he insane? Is his representation of events misrepresented because he's unhinged? And to answer that, and that's absolutely a valid question, and we'll talk about that as well. However, I do think it's important to keep in mind this larger question. Does it really matter? Does it really matter if he's evil or if he's insane, given what he does in the story? Now, the answer to that question, of course, is going to help us, understand how the story is manipulated in other ways. But what we're after, perhaps one of the things that we're after in this story, or that Poe's asking us to question in this story, is whether evil or whether, Montresor's reason for the things that he does in this story, whether it really matters at the end of the day. I look forward to hearing what you all think about it, and make sure and stay tuned for your analysis video where we're going to go way in depth into how all of this works.